Welcome back, everybody, to Power Hour. I am Jim Breslo, where we are covering the latest in politics direct out of Washington, D.C., and we've got more news today. It's coming at you fast and furious in this Trump administration, and we got the perfect person to cover it all. It is Jessica Stone, longtime Washington, D.C. correspondent, coming to us from Ground Zero. Jessica, welcome to Power Hour.
Good to be with you.
Thanks for coming on. Let's get right to it because, as I said, things are happening fast and furious. Today is a big day when we talk about tariffs because we've got meetings both with Europe and with China today. The German chancellor, and as well as finally a meeting between Trump and Xi. This seems to be something that Trump has been getting to the point of almost groveling for until he finally got it. The markets have been wanting to see a deal with China, and it's been quite a dance up until now. What can you report as far as what we know that happened today?
Well, early this morning, we got news from Chinese state media that there had been a call, and we didn't have verification from the White House for several hours, but we just got that in the last hour or so before taping, where President Trump said on his social media, Truth Social, that he had concluded a phone call with President Xi of about an hour and a half, mostly on trade. He says this: there should no longer be any questions respecting the complexity of rare earth products. That was obviously a big sticking point in these talks and continues to be. The U.S. cannot survive, and especially the U.S. auto industry cannot survive without rare earth access. China has 90% plus access to these rare earth minerals. These are specifically to help batteries inside these cars go longer and be exposed to high levels of heat. The president saying that we will have a next round of talks with Besant, who the market loves, the Treasury Secretary, Lutnick, who the market less loves, the Commerce Secretary, and United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer, who's the author of all of this in terms of how to approach to China. They also exchanged greetings and, invitations to come to each other's countries. We don't have a date certain for that meeting yet. And this is classic Beijing, where they say, oh, we got a deal. We got a deal to have another meeting. So we'll see if there's anything tangible that comes out of this. But it is important for the markets and for Americans to know that these two major economies are talking. You and I are talking, at least I'm talking to you on an Apple iPhone. So, and I know I went and got the renewal, Jim. I don't know if you did before the 90-day tariff window was lifted. I made sure I got my upgrade. So if you haven't, little piece of word to the wise, get your upgrade on your Apple device before then. I'm going to try to get a computer too before that 90 days is up, because that's going to be a big impact on Americans that are specifically Apple users.
I'm waiting for the American-made Apple phone only, so I'm holding out for
Oh,
that. How many
okay. You might be
years?
holding out a while, buddy.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many years do we have to wait for that? I mean, that's clearly what Trump says that he wants, but is it really realistic?
Yeah, I would say it is not realistic to have all of the components made in the United States. I'm reading this book by I can't recall the journalist's name, about Apple in China, and one of the huge gifts that Apple has given to China is it's trained all of the engineers in China to put all of the supply chain within China, to literally innovate on the manufacturing line, how to make these very complex products. Because as we know, as I've been on IBMs, you've been on IBMs, Hewlett Packard. You used to have to do the MS DOS back in the day in the 80s. Um, Apples are special. Apple devices are more complex, and right now they've got the zeitgeist of the American people, really of the world. But it's really not possible to make the Apple iPhone outside of China, thanks to the partnership between Foxconn and Apple. So I've been really fascinated in reading how much China benefited, not just from having these major multinational corporations and technology companies come to make things there, but to invest in their people and in their products. And now it's a marriage that's really going to be hard to unwind or to divorce between Apple and China.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see here who has the upper hand in this negotiation. I mean, I would think the U.S. is a larger economy. China very dependent on exports to U.S. It seems that the U.S. has these companies have other options. You've got India and Vietnam and a lot of other places where labor is cheap. And I believe China's already lost a lot of manufacturing kind of as a result of this war. I mean, how can people assess the strength of both sides here?
Well, I quibble with a couple of things you threw out there. Number one, a lot of things have moved to Vietnam, especially in textiles. So a lot of, if you look at the tags on your clothes, you're going to see Vietnam on there, but they're still Chinese-owned factories. So all that China's really done is they've moved the manufacturing across the border. Vietnam has very much been targeted by this round of tariffs under the Trump administration because of that, because of this sort of bleeding over into nearby countries. India is another ball of wax. I think they will pick up some more of the manufacturing from Apple, as Apple has said they want to move some iPhone manufacturing over there. Trump didn't like that, right? He really wants it to move here, and you know, these are good goals for any president to have, but the devil's in the details. And I think you would probably agree with me, Jim, that the Biden administration wanted a lot of this to come back too. They had a different strategy. They wanted to pay people to come back with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the other major legislation that they had, that the CHIPS Act, that literally gave people large sums of money. But when you think about the investment that they wanted to make in bringing back manufacturing, it's just a fraction of what Apple has already spent in China to train up these people and create these supply chains. It cannot compete. So really, you probably need the best of both worlds to bring this manufacturing back to the United States. You need a little bit of the Biden CHIPS Act, which Trump hates and came out explicitly, right, in his State of the Union address against, and you need the tariffs. And the interesting thing about tariffs that I thought was really fascinating today, Trump giving credit on his social media post today, that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, this wonky part of Washington that probably most Americans have never heard of, it scores bills. So it scored the tax bill and it said how much it's going to contribute to the deficit. Well, it also gave credit to the tariffs to bring $2.8 trillion back into the US economy, which is something that the Trump administration has been touting and that we haven't been hearing as the salient message about the power of these tariffs, right? Like the message has always been, you're going to wind up picking up the tab, right? And do you feel like you are picking up the tab there in California?
I don't think people have felt it yet. You know, certainly everyone in this country, I think, has enjoyed very low, cheap goods for a long time, and I think we've become a little bit addicted to it. You know, one commentary I tend to make, and especially traveling the world, is just how inexpensive stuff is here. I mean,
Yeah, no
Walmart,
doubt.
you can go there and get an entire replacement for your set of dishes for like, you know, $29.99. You go to other countries and it's not that cheap. And you know, we've become addicted to these cheap goods. I think some of Trump's statements in that regard have been kind of humorous and interesting, where he kind of says, you know, well, do you really need $20? You know, why don't you have $2? Or I forget what item he was referring
Yeah,
to,
no, you're
which,
right.
you know,
My girls need more than $2, just so you know.
I was going to say, politically, it's not the wisest statement to tell people what they need. However, I do tend to agree with them. It is kind of ridiculous. And yes, I'll bring it
Yeah.
home to me also. I have my daughter over here, 3.5 years old, and her room is just packed with crap. And I wish I could throw 90% of it out. But it's just
Amen,
so,
brother. Amen.
but you know, it's so darn cheap that you don't mind
Right.
buying it for him. So every day, my wife is buying her some new $3.99 thing at Ross that, you know, she
Yep.
enjoys. It gives her attention for the day, and then it sits in the room for the next 6 months.
Yeah.
So this addiction to cheap goods, you know, Trump, it's interesting his commentary on that.
Well, and I think that some of that just is a cultural shift, right? Like my parents love to buy stuff for my kids, and it's because it's so cheap. And every time my mom buys another thing they don't need, she tells me it's because it was only, you know, X number of dollars. And I'm like, Mom, that's not the point. I have to find a place for it. And if I don't have a place for it or they don't need it, or really I don't want them to have another thing that doesn't work after 5 minutes of playtime, you know, like let's also the environmental impact, I could go there, but you know, I think a lot of parents
Well,
experience that frustration with
one
kid
thing to
stuff
keep in
because
mind,
so much of it is
Jessica,
made in China.
yeah, one thing to keep in mind is it is so cheap. That means throwing it out, we shouldn't lose any sleep over. So we should be willing to throw the stuff out just as quickly as we
She
buy
hates
it.
me when I do that, but I do have to do that. You're right.
But you do make a good note about Vietnam, because I don't follow this that closely. I wasn't really aware. It makes sense, obviously, that China's moving stuff over there, because I oftentimes am looking for the thing to be made anywhere other than China, and I used to be relieved when I saw it was Vietnam. But you're saying no, don't be
Oh
relieved
no,
by
especially
Vietnam.
not in electronics. I was in Hanoi in 2019. That was the last time I was over in Asia. And was it 2019? Yeah, it was 2019. And there are office parks upon office parks for all of the electronics companies. They're really trying to attract them. And then the CHIPS Act was used by, I spoke to Vietnamese office park managers who were trying to leverage the CHIPS Act funding and that sort of, sorry, not the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act funding, to get investment by U.S. companies to build things in Vietnam, because it would be moving the supply chain, as you point out, away from China, but and allowed to say made in Vietnam. But a lot of the components are only going to be made in China. They've got a lock on this. It's not going to. It took 30 years to get them up to speed, or at least 15 to 20. It's not going to be overnight that we can decouple.
So Trump was hit with a really interesting wrinkle to the whole thing recently with this trade court ruling, which my understanding, a three-judge panel that focuses just on trade, and I think that it was a 3-0 ruling that's saying that Trump doesn't have the authority to implement these tariffs. My understanding is the Constitution specifically gives the authority to do tariffs to Congress. It is kind of a taxing power, so it makes sense that it is Congress. That Congress has passed a law or two that delegates some limited authority to the president to do it, and that Trump kind of tried to drive a truck through that. That ruling is stayed right now. However, insiders, legal experts seem to think that, yeah, it stayed for the moment. However, when the appellate court rules, DC appellate court, I think, that they're going to uphold that trade court ruling. So I don't know how closely you're following that, but that's going to really clip his wings on what he's doing on a lot of this, I think.
Yeah, and I think that I don't have the breakdown of who's on the appellate court and there's the sort of sense of how they may vote on something like this, but um, it's got to be a lot of give and take. The Republicans, though, in Congress, kind of want to execute whatever Trump puts out there, anyways. And I mean, if you look at how that's playing out in the party with this big, beautiful bill, you don't have that many Republicans standing up against the U.S. president who, won decisively the election, even on debt. We don't have Republicans that really don't want to increase the debt the way that some of them have campaigned. You've got, I think, two Senate Republicans who are looking to shoot down this big, beautiful bill, which has all the 2017 tax cuts. It has a lot more goodies in it for other parts of the country as well, and has cuts to Medicaid to offset some of that, which is upsetting some Republicans too. But what's really salient is, yeah, you can have a decision in the judiciary, but are the Republicans just going to basically rubber stamp whatever Trump wants anyway? It certainly is looking that way, and why would they not? It's for most of them, it's politically expedient.
Yeah, I just don't know, and you probably know better than me, what requires 60 votes in the Senate. Because if you're talking about a new tax, and if a tariff is akin to a tax, I think a new tax would require 60 votes in the Senate. So I'm not sure
Oh, you mean if
Republicans
it
can.
went through as a tax bill? Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah. I
can
mean,
see
what
your
they're doing
point.
right. Yeah, I have a feeling it would fall into that category. So I'm not sure if they could do this. But let's stay on the big, beautiful bill for a moment. We've got the Elon Musk statements, which are interesting, both politically and substantively, about this bill. One observation I had is, yes, they're saying it adds, I forget the number, 2.4 trillion to the deficit. Of course, that's CBO, and people are quibbling with CBO, and they're not accounting enough for
Three.
3 trillion.
No, you're right. 2.4. 3
2.4.
trillion deficit reduction from the tariffs minus a little bit of change. So actually, the tariff impact on the deficit is greater than the taxes add to the deficit, according to the CBO. So
But
it's good news and bad news
okay,
in that report.
but then that begs the question on the tariffs. But what tariffs are they talking about when they are rating this, and what's the likelihood those tariffs are going to stay in place for 10 years? So
Well,
Do you
that's
know?
I mean, that's a question we don't have the answer to because Trump likes to go up and down. He uses them as a negotiating thing. I think the CBO was just weighing all of the tariffs up until May 13th was
Yeah,
the
I mean, look,
parameters they were putting it around. But that could change at any moment, to your point.
exactly. It could change because of the court ruling. I mean, in a matter of days, that could change. But anyway, it's an interesting wrinkle, and maybe we'll have some additional revenue from tariffs. But on the 2.4, two observations. One, I'm hearing a lot of commentators say that, well, the CBO doesn't properly track likely increase in GDP as a result of tax cuts, so that they're not properly scoring that. I think that they are projecting like 1.8% GDP growth or something like that, and over the decade. And apparently, our GDP has never grown at less than like 2.2% over a decade. So they're being ultra conservative on that, which makes a huge difference. Number one. Number two, that's 2.4 trillion over 10 years, right? So that's 240
Yeah.
billion a
Million.
year.
Oh
Uh
boy.
240 billion a year, right? As far as annualized.
I think that math is correct. You just knock off a zero, right?
Right, exactly. So my point is that's not good, but I think it's better than what we've been doing over the last few years. A lot better.
Well, I think that's
We
sort of the point that Senator Thune was making at the White House yesterday, where he's like, the CBO isn't accounting for the economic growth that these tax cuts are going to allow. To me, the big political point is, Trump ran on no tax on tips. He ran on no tax on your Social Security, and he really, if he wants to keep those independent voters in the tent, those sort of middle, especially the working class voters that came over to Trump land, he's got to make good on that. And it doesn't mean it's not expensive. It probably wasn't a practical for deficit hawks. It wasn't a practical promise to begin with. But I think it's important to him to make good on that promise, and that's why he's pushing so hard to get this over the finish line. And why, most Senate Republicans who aren't deficit hawks, there's two that are saying we're not going to vote for it, and maybe they can lose one more vote to get it across the finish line. It politically, Trump's got to get this done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'd like to see the numbers as far as what the deficit has been in recent years, but I think it's been over $1 trillion. I mean, the COVID spending was just insane. It seems like our debt, isn't the debt like 36 trillion or 39 trillion or something like that
Let me
right
go
now?
to the debt watcher, U.S. debt today.
Yeah, I have a feeling this is curbing it substantially. I'll continue to talk
36 trillion. Yeah. That's the
right.
debt as of this week.
Right. And I'm pretty sure that's been going up by over $1 trillion a year. I mean, certainly COVID, blew a hole through the whole thing. And certainly a proper critique of this budget would be if this isn't taking us to pre-COVID spending, which apparently we're not even getting anywhere close to pre-COVID spending, but that's where we should be. I mean, that is a very valid critique. It's like COVID's over.
Yeah.
Let's compare this budget to the 2019 budget, and where were we then?
I think the pushback would be, obviously Trump likes to bite off more than maybe he could chew. Some would say, certainly a lot of chewing gum at the same time, right? He's bouncing a lot of balls, putting a lot of plates, whatever metaphor you want to use. And if you're making these kind of enormous changes to the U.S. economy, especially basically trying to rearrange the supply chains that make most American goods in 4 years, it's going to cause a lot of disruption and a lot of expense. And it's not clear that you can do no tax on tips and rearrange the global economy to benefit Americans at the same time. So I think
No,
that's something that it's hard to factor in.
I think that's a great point, and I would add to that, that's great that CBO is calculating in some revenue from tariffs, but it's also a big unknown. Where are we going to wind up on tariffs, and what is it going to do to our economy? Because we know the stock
Well, it
market.
definitely raises inflation in the short term.
There you go. And we know the stock market hated what he did on April 1st. And a ongoing trade war with China is definitely going to be negative for the economy. And yeah, if the goal is long term to somehow reorganize as you say, the economy and bring manufacturing back to the U.S., you're going to have some, even Trump says, you're going to have some short-term pain. I would argue you're probably going to have a few years of pain because
Oh
we know
yeah,
that
no doubt.
it takes a long time to
So one
rebuild
of the
that.
most interesting things interesting conversations I had was a couple of years ago in advance of APEC. I talked to Jameson Greer when he was an attorney in a law firm here in Washington, and he was pleased as punch that the Biden administration was keeping those tariffs on. And I think, just thinking about how the Biden administration didn't lift a lot of the things that were implemented in the Trump administration tells you that there's an appetite here in Washington. Maybe the American people don't have the same appetite to change reliance on China for these goods and for these jobs. Doesn't mean that we're all going to come back in the same way that you're not going to cut and paste from Beijing to the United States. But if they could bring more of those processes back, it's not just about job creation, it's about national security, right? Because you don't want certain classes of products in the auto sector, for example, to have to be made in a country that can cut them off from you at a moment's notice, which is what we're experiencing now with these rare earths. Biden, whether he was cogent at the time, which is the debate of the day, how much how much brain power did he have and how much time uh, does he- does he or does his staff at least bear responsibility for keeping that train on the tracks during the last 4 years?
Yeah. Well, you did the segue, not me, into Biden's health. Let's cover that before we wrap up. Speaking of perhaps taking on too many things, here's yet another thing to take on, which one could argue, what's the value of that for your everyday American today? I know what the argument is on the other side. The Republicans are going to say, "Oh my gosh, we got to make sure this never happens again," and so we got to really dig into this. But it kind of strikes me as a ha ha, you idiots, as a way to make Democrats look really bad, as opposed to something that has genuine value for the country. How do you think
You mean the
it's
debate?
a
You mean the debate about his mental decline?
Yeah, I mean, basically to use congressional resources to embark on some huge investigation as to exactly what was his mental state and the use of the Autopen and so on. Is this
Well, I think
just
the upside is, well, the
political
American
theater?
people, yeah, well, yes, of course it is. But the upside is if, the DOJ subpoenas the same people, we're not going to hear that testimony. If Congress does, we have a chance of hearing these hearings, hearing what these people said. Now, whether they respond, if Karine Jean-Pierre or some of the other aides, Jeff Zients, respond to these subpoenas and actually come, that would be great to understand what they knew about Biden's ability to make decisions, to sign in person, understand what he's signing. These. Uh, Having said all of that, I think you're probably right about congressional resources. That's another argument to make. But the thing the American people, I think, really want to understand is they really do want to understand who was running the country during the last 4 years. Was it Biden? Was it certain aides around Biden? Was it Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden? What was going on in the last 4 years, because he didn't know right up until that debate and even after that debate, he did not know how bad that debate was. He did not realize, and it was very evident to the American people. And I think it just goes to the trust of government, obviously goes to the trust of media. Americans are very skeptical of a media who did not report on this, who chose not to report on this for the last 4 years. I was hearing whispers in the White House press corps that people understood what was going on, and yet it was not on their lips when they went out to the cameras.
Yeah, but again, do we need Congress investigating? Did the media handle this properly? We all know MSNBC and CNN, most of the others, are totally biased. That's not new. And anybody who watched Fox News knew what horrible condition Biden was in, because they would always laugh and show him stumbling up the stairs or making all the things. So it's shame on the people who only watched MSNBC or CNN. They didn't get the story. If you were watching Fox, you knew the whole story. I wasn't surprised one bit by his debate performance. It's exactly what I expected his debate performance, because I had been watching it again and
Mhm.
again. So,
So do you agree with
the
DOJ
news is out there.
resources? Do you agree with DOJ
Uh,
resources going towards it? Because I mean, I think we're going to have a double investigation. We're going to have one by the congressional Republicans to say, aha, we got him. And we're going to have one by the Trump DOJ to say the same thing.
Yeah, well, I hate getting in this pattern where, each time we change presidency, we go after the other. What they did to Trump is ridiculous, and this appears to me to be a little bit of payback for that. And I don't want us to
Hmm.
get stuck in this where we're always trying to, criminalize what the prior guys did. And they are talking about criminal, by the way. They're basically saying, hey, if that Autopen was used without Biden's authority, that is a felony, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean,
We should just note for the audience that Biden came out with a statement uh, last night, the night before we're taping here. I made the decisions about the pardons, executive orders, legislation, and proclamations. Any suggestion that I didn't is ridiculous and false. By statement.
yeah. So look, we already have thank God we still have a relatively free press in America. So all this stuff is coming out. So Americans are going to become very aware of what Biden's condition was and how stupid it was that he was considering running for president. That's come out in the books and a lot of commentary. As far as a DOJ investigation, I mean, if I heard that there's some specific person who has come to DOJ as a whistleblower and say that I used Autopen without his authority, or I know so-and-so used Autopen without his authority, now you've got evidence of a crime. So just digging around searching for a potential crime, no, I don't like that. But if there was something specific, and I haven't heard it, have you heard any
I
specific
haven't heard a
allegation where there was
whistleblower,
a
but you know
witness?
what? The churn is a churning with the KJP book. I mean, I don't think it would be difficult to find someone who would be a whistleblower, because at
So,
this
so is
point,
that,
and maybe it's going to be her. Maybe she's going to put something in the book and say something behind closed doors. I find that somewhat hard to believe, but she's already, turning on the Democratic Party, saying I'm going to be an independent, and yet she was a mouthpiece for all of this for 2.5 years. So maybe to save face, she'll go turn tail. I mean, members of the Trump administration certainly did that
yeah.
after January 6th in particular.
Yeah, if that happens, then we got something. Otherwise, it sounds like Russiagate to me, and it's the Republicans doing Russiagate. And I know our natural
Not a good
instinct is
look.
to want, your natural instinct is to get retribution for the absurdity of Russiagate, but it was absurd, and we got to be careful that we don't go that same path. Well, we did it. That's a hard stop. 30 minutes, Jessica. We really appreciate you coming on the Power Hour and giving us the inside scoop from DC. And I'm sure we're going to have you on again soon.
Hey, good to be with you. Had a good time.
Thank you all for watching and listening to Power Hour. We'll be back soon with another great episode.